Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about a game I've waited for a long time, namely Hibernian Workshop's Dark Devotion, which I interviewed the devs about a long while ago. Admittedly, this is a title that I did some beta testing for back in the day, and which I ultimately received a review copy for, but as ever, I'll be doing my utmost to provide a relevant and honest insight into the game's unhallowed machinations. Let's find out if Dark Devotion is a title that deserves your praise, or if it commits grievous sins against gamers. The plot for Dark Devotion isn't exactly the most straightforward thing to narrate, but I'll give it my best shot from what I parsed from the opening movie, dialogue with NPCs, and the chunks of lore scattered throughout the game. You're a nameless female Templar in service to a nightmarishly oppressive theocracy. So I mean, you're not really the best of people. But I don't think most people in Dark Devotion are, so I mean, yeah. The game's intro has you basically earning your just desserts, though, given you end up in what is essentially an ill-fated crusade against a temple, which lasts all of about 3 minutes before going horribly wrong. Also, I'll admit that it actually took me a fair bit to figure out why the totally evil monolithic church state was feeding Templars into the guts of a murderous temple. No, it's not for the evils. Well, not entirely. That said, despite the fact that I wasn't initially super clear in a lot of the plot threads, I definitely came to be a lot more invested in the story arc as I went along and continued exploring. There was just something about discovering the lore tidbits through optional notes scattered throughout the dungeon, or encountering NPCs in the depths of the temple and chattering with them while monsters weren't mauling me. That was pretty enjoyable, and it certainly broadened my understanding of things ever so slowly. Like, this is definitely one of those titles where you need to go out of your way to get them precious bits of info, as you're able to sort of haplessly throw yourself against the dungeon's denizens without ever parsing out the exact reason for why you're doing the thing. And you know, in doing so, you'll miss out on some neat moments. Mechanically, things are pretty easy to pick up and play. At least, if you walk into it with the knowledge that's a 2D Souls-like that can be dickishly unforgiving. At least, that's what I quickly came to the conclusion of, given that once I'd finished the tutorial and run around the hub area talking to people, I was quickly introduced to a spear trap to the face, which taught me to be aware of my surroundings and look for traps, and then the instantaneous death pit full of spikes that really drove that point home when I dropped into it because I leaped before I looked. Round 2 of the game went a little bit better, as I already learned while running around the hub that there is no jump. And to answer every salty Steam review ever, no, you don't need the jump either. Cripes, you can literally explore everywhere you need to without it. But you know, more on that later. So anyways, I rolled over the pit, started to engage a sword fight with a basic enemy, who then proceeded to slap me a couple times and then nudge me back, and my dramatic roll to get behind it landed me into the spikes. Round 3 went a lot better than that, and I actually made progress. And that's the thing. The idea of dying, restarting, and pressing forward is very central to Dark Devotion, though it doesn't quite play out the same as its other Souls-like siblings. For one thing, once you begin exploring the dungeon, you cannot backtrack. Sure, you can take more circuitous routes since there's multiple paths to explore, and the various biomes have different entrances and exits, but the level design very much forces you to commit to a path and continue forging ahead. Honestly, this can actually be a bit perplexing for me at times. Like, I'm not fibbing when I said I used pages of a worn-out college agenda to jot down reminders for myself of places to go to, things I'd already done, and stuff that I still needed to do, because while there's an in-game map, it's not exactly ideal. That's not to say there isn't ways to retain a sense of progress, as you do encounter shrines that you can use to save where you were in the dungeon, so you can enter at your current base strength. Like, honestly, I just broke them because they exploded into goodies, and I really prefer to sort of start the game from scratch and build up again rather than jump into a portal right near a boss at base strength and get slapped around like I owed the boss money. There's also hub doors, which serve as checkpoints to the later sections of the game. Think like little worlds, which have the same downside of, yes, you saved time and jumped forward, but you also missed out on a lot of gear and buffs, compounded even further, since they cannot be exploded for goodies. I mean, I guess it's not really compounded, but you can't explode them for goodies, okay? I'm a little sad about that. Still, with the whole die and then restart from the beginning thing, and then running through and trying again mechanic, I did end up developing a fairly in-depth knowledge of these areas and how to wander about, despite the fact that my memory is a horrible sieve, which in turn lent itself fairly well for me slowly discovering the game's secrets. And there are a number of secrets to be found, vis-a-vis smashing down walls, solving puzzles, and weird bits of, well, sort of platforming, but if you decide to work with gravity, so basically falling with style. Which actually ends up feeling super important to advancing, given that you start out fairly feeble. In the you don't level up traditionally, normal enemies will happily perforate you till you resemble a teabag, and bosses will dunk you then toss you out into the trash if you walk into their room half dead for the first time. Look, I've made better metaphors admittedly, but that's what you're getting. The point is, the game feels lethal as hell, in part because you have a fixed amount of times you can be hit. Your meager health is tied to your trinket item, while your shield points are tied to your armor. Both these have healing items related to themselves, though armor is generally easier to repair. The thing is, however, that in doing so, this limits the amount of consumable items you can hold, and also just because a trinket or armor piece gives you a decent amount of survivability doesn't actually make it any good, as these items also influence things like your accuracy, crit chance, and stamina regeneration. If you fail to keep these things in mind, you can even end up handicapping yourself in an attempt to make yourself more survivable, which gets even worse if you pick up an inaccurate as hell weapon, or fail to notice a debuff granted by a piece of your gear, like the fact that it'll cause you to explode every once in a while, or take double damage. Because there are buffs and debuffs in this game to be mindful of, like the ones I just mentioned. Some of them are pretty powerful too, like the ones I just mentioned. But also like getting a one-time be healed to full health when you would die, or regaining health when you kill someone. But there's also some really unfortunate side effects. What's more though, is not all these are even tied to equipment, because the blessing and curse systems also come into play in a few more fashions. Notably, the game punishes you with curses when you play poorly, like running like a coward from an area when an enemy is chasing you, which causes you to drop consumables whenever you dodge, or dodging too much when you're low on stamina, which makes you regenerate stamina slower. Yep, it's great. It also rewards you, however, for things like mastering a weapon by using it for a while, or killing the heck out of everything in your path, or clearing rooms without being hit. I mean, there's also blessings that you can acquire from spending devotion, which is a system I haven't talked about much, but it basically functions like the game's currency. See, you can pray with white devotion points, which you start with the max amount every run, to open doors, optional chests, or even gain healing or nifty bonuses from blessing shrines. You can also use it to cast magic. That said, while you start with some, the primary means by which you acquire it back is the brutal and bloody murder of your enemies. Also sometimes reading books, I guess, but mostly murder. There's also red devotion, however, which is acquired a lot more rarely and is one of the few things that carry over between runs. Red devotion you can spend at a shrine in the hub on unlockable skills, which also remember to select them when you activate them, because I completely forgot to do so for a while. These essentially function as a skill tree in this game, with you being able to select one of these per tier, and they end up having some really neat synergies between both each other as well as the items you end up acquiring. Lets you do some nifty stuff like caster builds, archers, flighty dodgy builds, or even like two-handed weapon wielding warriors. That said, that's not the only thing that carries forward. Earlier on, I mentioned that you start out fairly feeble, and part of that is as you explore the dungeon, you find gear and consumable items that you fill out your armory with, which ends up letting you start with these the next time you run. I mean, you can't snag every item you come across, both in the sense of acquiring them or bringing them with you into your next dungeon run, but enemies will sometimes drop items of a retrievable rarity, as well as some chests containing consumables and certain chunks of gears, And doing quests for certain NPCs at the base also enable more items for you to play around with. You will ultimately be building a kit, but it's honestly really fun to tinker with that. Plus, going toe-to-toe with the game's many bosses gives you a boss-flavored weapon to play with, both for that run and back at the base, though the boss weapon tends to be more powerful and efficient when they drop it, even if both are generally potent additions to your arsenal. Winding back full circle, however, is that if all these things can't somehow pique your interest to hunt out the far corners of the dungeons and seek out the secrets, and there is some pretty unique hidden weapons about, there's also tablets for you to discover. Which, these are a bit more straightforward in how they boost you, given they influence your stamina cap, max devotion, crit, and damage, and just cumulatively build up the more you activate. I went out of my way to get all of them, and they make a considerable difference in how you fight, especially in tandem with the skill tree blessings. Which is a good thing, really, given that there's 2 endings to the game to find, and the latter one, the good ending, will require you to get rather adept at battling the game's various creatures. Which is as much as I'll hint until the comments right anyways. It's not too hard to figure out the other ending. If you're a fan of like dramatic orchestral ambiance, Dark Devotion's got you covered in general. Like, I was a fan of the game's soundtrack, but hot damn, there's some absolutely excellent bits of audio amongst the game's bosses that just really sold this aspect to me. Also, I legitimately found the sound effects to be useful, since I was occasionally using the audio cues that enemies made to figure out if there was one nearby, or if there was a projectile incoming from slightly off screen. Possibly while my back was turned and I was stabbing an enemy in the face. I'm not bitter. Whilst I'm aware that not everyone is a major fan of pixel art, I personally do enjoy it, and especially the work that Hibernian Workshop put into animating the world of Dark Devotion. Whether it was in fleshing out the appearance of the various biomes you have to explore, the characters you encounter, or just plain the attack patterns of the enemies you come across. Plus, some of the weapons you end up wielding have some very satisfying combo animations. But, alright, so we're at the nigh final moments of this review, the chips are down, and I've said my spiel, almost. And that's because, despite how interesting I find Dark Devotion, I don't think it manages to be a crit hit, because it's missing a certain integral feature, and no, it's not a fucking jump button, okay? God damn it, people. But specifically, Dark Devotion, in its current state, if you were to exit out of the game mid-run, it will not save your progress. No matter how near or far you are at the end of a run, Dark Devotion is not able to save where you are in the temple's guts, or how strong you're buffed yourself or your weapons up. Which means if you need to leave for work, or because you have a kid, or you are a kid and you have a curfew and your parents are peeling you off the PC forcibly for school, or I guess necessary human being time outside, you can't just exit and pick up where you left off. Like, yes, anything you unlock, whether it's a tablet or a piece of equipment or a quest you finish, will be unlocked when you pick it back up, but you will also start at the beginning again, requiring generally a large amount of commitment from players. So that's the big one. I have nitpicks, sure, like I'm not really happy at the map, nor the fact that it doesn't do a good job of telling the players that they have or haven't activated a tablet. The icon remains identical for tablets in either case. There's also the trap in the final area of the game, which counterintuitively punishes you by eating your buffs when you roll through it, after you're taught by every other trap, including others in the same area, that rolling through stuff is life. And yet, despite that, there's a lot of things I loved. I loved the exploration, the gradual sense of gaining strength, of conquering bosses and pilfering their weapons off their still warm carcasses. I don't have issues. I was also super pleased when I found out that devs actually rewarded you for taking down a boss unarmed, and I totally did punch the crap out of basically all of the bosses in the game. I also indulged in the optional Redeemer mode hidden in the game that sets your max health and armor to 1 for those folks who need a hard mode. Like, seriously, for those folks who are looking for a Souls-like with a focus on exploration, some tasty music, a lot of Lord One Earth, and just a lovely chunk of ambience, it's definitely all here. It just really didn't help that if I had to hop off, I could lose an hour or so's progress. That sucked a lot. Anyways, with my rambling done, it is still safe to say that the game's a hit in my book. By the by, I'd just like to thank you folks for both tuning in and sticking till the end. So, whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts, I'd love to hear from you folks in the comments. And, for those interested in more indie reviews or interviews with developers, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified when we have a new release. You can join our Discord, click the link in the banner description to become a part of our community, our nice, cozy, friendly, welcoming, totally not a cult community. Lastly, if you'd like to help support our channel, we have a Ko-fi running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editors, and to make sure that we can continue to provide quality content every week. Again, you can check the description and banner for those links. Anywho, I'll catch y'all on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks!